as I collected Civil War, I actually, through the influence of Bert Comerow, I became more aware of the photography, and I became aware of the photography and learning more about the history, and I had already acquired some Civil War photographs of Civil War soldiers, but I knew nothing about the history of photography, nothing about these photographs that I had other than it was a picture of a Civil War soldier. Then I had that epiphany in the early 1970s that early photography was around. It was an item that was at flea markets. It was at antique shows. It was in antique shops. Great stuff was available. And that window of opportunity was only going to last for a little while. So I sold off most of my Civil War collection and began to focus on 19th century photography with the Civil War element as a major part of that. Then I became interested about wanting to know if these photographs were signed, who were these people that made these images, and when were they in business? And so in the late 1980s, I published my Directory of Maryland Photographers, which was basically the research that I used while I was running the roads. I always kind of thought of myself as a road scholar, and that was R-O-A-D scholar, while I was out there searching. And this is kind of stuff that I would use, and this was actually the first publication to ever be done dealing with the history of photography in Maryland. I then got into working on Civil War photographers and did 3 volumes on directories of who were they and when were these people in business, because since many, particularly the paper photographs of this era, are signed by the photographers, and if they have an address, these people went in and out of business and they moved around a lot. So if you know that information, it can also give you another piece to help you in interpretation of the photograph. Then I retired in 2001 from public school teaching history and a variety of other things. And after I did that, I did the introduction to African American photographs, 1830 to 1950. And really, this is the first book to ever really take a look at the history of photography and the relationship of African Americans with it in the United States. And 2006, also while I was retired, I was asked to curate an exhibit on the Civil War photographs. B. Hardy, who was librarian at the time, kind of stunned me when she said, well, we want to do an exhibit on Civil War photography, and we want to do it, and we want to open it up in about 3 months. So off I went to finally accepting the charge and put together this exhibit in 2006. We opened around the end of, I think the 1st of May is when we opened, and the exhibit closed in October. This was our focal point that we did with curtains. Civil War in Maryland, rare photographs from the collections of Maryland Historical Society and its members. This was a landmark exhibit because we exhibited all original photographs. We had a couple hundred original photographs, basically telling the story of the Civil War in Maryland through original photographs. And I'm not shy to be able to say, I believe this is the best exhibit that has been done in any museum anywhere using original Civil War photographs, much less to be able to focus on Maryland. As part of the exhibit, it was too important to not document its existence. Basically, we would have just had some photocopies of sheets of what were in the exhibit. And I said, nope, too important. So I wrote a catalog, put it together, and showed it to Dan Toomey at Toomey Publishing. Dan's here with us tonight. And Dan and I published the catalog to the exhibit to document it. And we sold out of all these, and actually these have gotten to be quite collectibles. So the book that has just come out, basically, it's based on the exhibit that was done in 2006. The catalog, I was only able to reproduce some of the photographs and reproduce those in black and white. This has most of the photographs that were in the 2006 exhibit. It has photographs that I did not include in the exhibit because I didn't have the originals. And it also, most importantly, includes quite a number of photographs that were discovered since 2006. It's just amazing of the things that have turned up between 2006 and today, documenting Maryland's experience during the Civil War. I start with the antebellum period, and I could really do a presentation, geez, I could do probably a couple hours on the images and the story of Civil War photography in Maryland. What I would hope is after people have gotten the book, you've been able to look at it and see about the story, it'd be nice then to be able to get together again and go through in detail the history and be able to talk about more of the photographs. But for the time tonight, what I did was pick out a few of my favorites that are in the book to be able to share with you, in some cases, the backstory of where these photographs come from. That's the most common question that I get is, where do you get this stuff? Well, it's where it has come from. In many cases, is very, very interesting. And I would like to be able to say that significantly as part of all this are the other collectors who cooperated with me and were willing to lend both for the 2006 exhibit and were willing to lend for publication of their images in the book. Now, last year, in September of last year, the Maryland Historical Society made some news when they bought this daguerreotype here on the left of Patty Avertis, and she was a slave. And this is all part of a group of photographs and documents that had been coming out of the Hanson family that came up for sale. And an incredible, incredible photograph. And of course, at the time, it was a debate over how much would it sell for. And I figured that if you bought it with something like this, there's a lot of organizations, a lot of institutions now trying to play catch up in the acquiring of African American history. And there's not that much around of great stuff. And so it does become very competitive, and this one became very competitive for the Historical Society. She was a very interesting story because along with all this came the documentation where she was sold in the 1830s to Dr. John Whitridge, who was there on the right. And she remained as a nurse with the family up through the ending of slavery, continued, as we believe, continued on as a nurse with the family, and she is even buried in the family plot in Greenmount Cemetery. To find a early daguerreotype, because this is probably taken about 1846, 47, that is identified, to be able to have the documentation to go with it of her whole story and the relationship that she had with the Whitridge family, and being Marylanders, it is incredibly rare. So I was able to, glad to be able to bring these together. The Historical Society got Patty, and I'm glad to be able to say that I bought the daguerreotype at the sale of Dr. Whitridge, and be able to bring them together here. Also, these will be together on display in a not too distant future, which I'll talk about in a little while. Some other photographs that I featured in there that are amongst my favorite were taken about 1860 by Henry Pollock. Henry Pollock was a photographer who went into business about 1848. He was really the most enduring of the pioneer photographers in Baltimore because he remained in business until the late 1880s. Well, about 1860, he went to Howard County to photograph the Carroll estate, the Reagan Manor. And these three photographs that I included in the book we had in the exhibit, be able to include them in the publication to really document, give us a glimpse into the antebellum life amongst Maryland's 1%. And in the backyard, here part of the gardens, being about 1860, this would document one of the Carroll family slaves. In the 1860 census, the Carrolls had about 75 slaves there on their estate. This is the chapel. You know, the Carrolls were Catholic, and so they had built their own chapel there as part of the Reagan Manor. And here are the ladies going out for a ride. and particularly interesting in the marginalization of the slaves. Notice the little slave boy who would have been helping the ladies be able to get up the steps, to be able to mount their horses, to be able to go for the rides. Incredibly rare photographs. Another very important photograph in the photographic history of antebellum Maryland is this one that was taken in the Great Hall of the Maryland Institute. This is, the Maryland Institute mica. But actually the Great Hall was located down on Baltimore Street. It burned up in fire. But before then, being built in the 1850s, it was a grand meeting place. It was a grand place for exhibitions and public affairs. In 1858, a very interesting event occurred when the remains of Wells and McComas were dug up out of Greenmount Cemetery. These were the two teenagers who were credited with killing General Ross in 1814 during the attack on Baltimore. And they dug them up. I guess they put them in new caskets, and they had them lie in state there at the Maryland Institute. And here they are surrounded by members of the Wells and McComas Riflemen. After they were there for a few days, and they processed them out of there, and they took them out to about Gate and Monument Street, where the Wells and McComas Monument is, and buried them there. I guess they're still buried there today. I guess most people, when they drive by that monument, don't realize there are remains under that monument. Well, in photographic history, this was a pretty important thing that happened there in 1858. John Dickinson took his camera to be able to photograph this event. And in fact, this is the beginning of photojournalism in Maryland, amongst the first photographs to ever be taken to document a historic event or a public event that was occurring. Of course, everything April 19th, 1861, the whole shebang changes after the 6th Massachusetts gets attacked on their way to the B&O station, Camden Station, from the President Street station. And people say, well, where do these images come from? Well, here's one. If you know what you're doing, you're out there looking. This turned up in a box lot at of a group of books at a Timonium auction. Just been stuck in there. And it's now a Buman print. It's about 4 by 5 inches or so. And what's very interesting is when you turn it over and what was on the back. Tablet monument to the memory of William R. Clark, martyr of Baltimore City. Killed on the 19th of April, 1861 during a street attack on the 6th Massachusetts Infantry on their way to the rescue of what after proved to be the worst government the world ever saw. And whoever this was, here Baltimore 1870, obviously was an unreconstructed Marylander. This is the first photograph to surface of one of the civilians who were in Baltimore who were killed during the Pratt Street riot. Now, he was actually from New York, and he had enlisted in the Confederate Regular Army. Before the attack on Fort Sumter, both the Confederate Regular Army and the United States Army both had recruiting offices in Baltimore. And he had signed up, and basically they would put him on a boat in groups, and they would take him down to Charleston, and they put him to work on fortifications down in Charleston. And around the time, by about December of 1860, January 61, people started to come back. They were disillusioned because they thought they were going to be marching around and be given uniforms and stuff like that, but and they were kind of unhappy. But he was waiting to be transported down there, and he was fatally wounded, took a bullet to the head, and that did him. But again, came out of a box lot at an auction in Timonium.